So the other bit of major news in the Nintendo investor sphere is that the Nintendo Switch has sold 150 million units. Shocking game journos and people in the sphere because the narrative was, considering that we knew that the Nintendo Switch 2 would be announced soon, that the Switch sales would taper off, that nobody would want to get one, that everyone would hold off for a Nintendo Switch 2. The community seems to very greatly underestimate like the nature of the market because the Nintendo Switch is going to sell for quite a long time after the Switch 2 is announced and released. The Nintendo Switch at least has another year in it, and it's probably going to be sold on store shelves for quite a while after that. And considering the very small gap between the Nintendo Switch sales and the PS2's reported sales, actually completely fake, which has been proven. Considering the very small gap between them at this point, it's safe to say that yes, over the next year or so, Nintendo Switch is going to close that gap. It is going to continue selling units. It is going to continue getting new games, and it is going to eclipse the completely provenly fake PlayStation 2 sales. So what this means is that in spite of like Sony updating the sales reports, several times over the past several years, Nintendo Switch is going to outperform them anyway, which is a huge blow against the narrative that the PlayStation is the most normie of normie consoles, because this isn't a console that people stuck with for the past 20 years. It's kind of crazy. Like if you're living in like my area and like seeing what like, people around you are playing, you see a lot of GameCubes, a lot of N64s, a lot of DSs, 3DSs, Wii's. You never see PS2s. You never see PS1s. Like the reality is, like the PlayStation 2 was not a console that was targeted towards gamers. It was targeted towards casuals. It was targeted to people who wanted a cheap DVD player. It never reached the same audience that the Switch did. And that's been a very observable thing even when it was still relevant, right? It was not something that actual enthusiasts cared about. Anybody who actually played more than 3 games a year would own an Xbox or a GameCube. The PS2, even back then, was a complete and total joke. Propped up only by like third parties, like throwing everything they possibly could on it to try and keep it relevant, right? Like PlayStation 2 was a complete and total joke, and that extends to like the PSP, the PS3, the Vita. Like the entire PlayStation brand is like built on a mountain of lies, right? It's just a giant. It's all just a giant cope. Okay, PlayStation was never competitive. They had to buy their way into this industry, and they're getting driven out in the most embarrassing way possible. And the thing about this, they can't update the sales numbers again because they gave a very definitive, hard answer this time. Like, oh, we sold 160 million. Like, they really thought that Nintendo Switch would not catch up to that. They really thought that just like, just gradually updating the numbers over the past several years would be this like very easy thing to do without people noticing it. But like we're at the point now where it's like mainstream knowledge that they're doing this. And yeah, like, gaming message boards like Fama boards are censoring people like me for bringing this up and talking about this openly. But it's becoming a commonly known fact now, right? They can't keep updating the PlayStation 2 numbers to stay ahead of Nintendo consoles without more people beginning to notice. And it begins like weird contradictions are starting to come up because they keep doing this. Like, for example, who exactly was buying these consoles, right? The narrative has always been like, well, it's selling because of the in third world countries. Like, what? Like, what are they playing in those countries? Like, it's like bootleg. Like, it's just, it was always just like, it was all just smoke and mirrors. You could easily see through it if you looked into it hard enough. It's been commonly known, like, among like hardcore Sony haters for a long time. Like I've been talking about this for like what, a decade? Like I don't remember when I figured out it was the PS2 sales numbers were fake, but like I have heard other people talk about this as well. I think Razorfist does. Like it's becoming more commonly known, and uh, Sony just by keeping up this farce for so long, Sony hasn't really been building up their brand outside of it. Because if you think about it, they put the PS2 on such a pedestal that the PS3 and the PS4 couldn't hope to reach. Like those consoles are seen as lesser to the iconic PS2, which is propped up by the industry as being like the gold standard of the golden age of gaming. It's not, but um, like the narrative is the PS2 is like the greatest thing ever produced. So like when Nintendo outperforms that and continues to outperform that and introduces a sequel console that's even more successful, like what is Sony gonna do? Right? They're just gonna sit there and twiddle their thumbs and like keep pretending as if like Aloy is popular. It's like no, they're finished. They're done. Like all they have is like an ever dwindling number of fanboys who grew up on their brand who are all like increasingly realizing that Nintendo is better. It's like what do they think is going to happen? Like so for me, like this is a really exciting situation to see. We're watching history unfold. Like we're beginning to see like Sony's mountain of lies just kind of like collapse in and around itself. And like it all starts here. Like this is the next major phase. Like seeing the PS2 lose its its false place as the best-selling console ever made to a Nintendo console, right? I would argue it's not the only one. The Nintendo DS, I believe, also outsold the PS2, but like, and there's probably a couple more Nintendo consoles that did, but Sony can't like keep lying about this. Like it's it's leading them to diminishing returns. It's leading people to feel as if like the brand has like regressed from how it was in the 2000s, right? But they can't back away from it because in a lot of ways, like the legacy of the PS2 is like the only thing that people can really talk about positively. Is like, oh yeah, but PlayStation sold the most. Like they're not talking about games. They're not talking about like real innovations. They're talking about a sales figures. Something that I know Nintendo Switch owners will not be doing 20 to 30 years from now. This is something that really needs to be talked about. I don't want to talk about sales. I don't care about the numbers. I don't care how much games sell. But Sony Sony did it. Sony forced us into this position to start talking about the best selling console ever made because they rigged the sales charts for the past 25 years, and now the chickens are coming home to roost. Nintendo is beating their fake sales numbers, and there is nothing they can do about it.